Kyle, when was the last time you were emotional at work?
At this exact second, Kaila, because I'm so emotional right now, because I'm very excited for this episode where we're going to talk about how to be emotional at work. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's get into it. Kaila, I'm getting a little emotional about this episode, but in particular about the end of the episode, because we have a special listener email, per my last email, from you all that we're going to react to at the end of this episode. So make sure you stay until the end. But now let's get into emotions at work.
Yes.
And I think you have a question for me.
Okay. Yeah. Way to tee it up. I was gonna ask you, who do you think is more emotional, you or me?
I'm definitely more emotional.
You think so?
Do you disagree?
I think you're more expressive.
Okay. More expressive.
More expressive of your emotions.
I'm more maybe emotive. We were
Yeah.
talking about that. But you think you're more emotional?
No. I think I have a tendency. I think when you feel something, you say that you feel it, and I think I keep it in, and then something unrelated will cause that feeling to come out. So it'll be like minor inconvenience, life meltdown.
Yeah.
You know,
erupt. You suppress and then you erupt.
Right. So super fun.
And
easy.
I just name it to tame it.
Ugh. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, but I still think I'm more emotional and maybe you suppress. I don't know. I feel like I feel things a lot.
I think that's
And
accurate.
and maybe you're a little more mellow.
I just have never ever heard anyone describe me as mellow, so
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I don't feel mellow.
Okay.
I feel like
How do you feel? Tell me how you feel.
I feel because I am non-confrontational. My emotions do not come out until I'm in front of a trusted third party.
I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'm thinking more Kaila at work and then
Yeah.
Kayla after hours.
Kayla after
Now,
hours.
That's an emotional.
I don't think that's true. I don't think so. I think I'm just like I'm just my first inclination is to hide the emotion that I'm feeling
Yeah.
at work because I don't think that you should be particularly emotional at work or like have emotions lead when you're in a professional conversation.
Okay.
I don't think you do that, to be clear.
No. This is really interesting.
Yeah.
Do you? I think what you said is what most people think, which is like,
Yeah.
I mean, you'll get advice all the time, like don't be too emotional at work. Like you're being too emotional. Like it's causing a scene. Like be a little more logical here. Those are very common phrases you hear in the workplace, and for the most part, like. Yeah, like you shouldn't be like quote unquote too emotional, but like what does that really mean? And I feel like that's just a way to like silence people you like don't even want to hear from, which is not good. Do you think that by you suppressing quote unquote your emotions that's ever backfired at work or like not been productive?
Yes.
Say more.
Okay. I think that there have been times where I have gone against or I have tried to suppress an emotion and thought that I was not being reasonable or logical because I was feeling this emotion. And then upon reflection, realizing that emotion was actually more valid in a professional setting than I had anticipated.
That's a great breakdown.
So like then I had to kind of go back and revisit that same conversation with that same person and be like, actually, I need to change my opinion here.
Yeah.
Because I thought that I was putting logic over emotion and therefore that was better for me and for the company. But the reality is like that emotion didn't go away and now it's going to erode my relationships here in this situation if I don't act.
Address it and talk about. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really good breakdown. Like the emotions you feel are signals. They're not always like 100% accurate. I think we've all been in a situation where we go to sleep, we wake up the next day and we're like, okay,
Like, all right,
that
that's not a
wasn't
big
that
deal.
big of a deal.
Yeah.
But in some cases you wake up and you're like, that actually was a big deal. And I'm glad I felt that emotion because it made me think about, wait, is this a big deal?
Yeah.
And it turns out it was. So there's definitely a balancing act. My hope for this episode is to open people's mind to thinking about not should I be emotional at work? Because I would argue that like you can't just like turn your limbic system off when you're at work.
Okay.
Yeah. Bit of a scientist here.
Yeah.
So you like we are emotional creatures, and again, like work-life boundary, like you are who you are when you show up at work. Yeah, you can modify and modulate, but you're still an emotional animal. And so I think the better conversation is to talk about how to be emotional at work and the right way and the wrong way to maybe channel and regulate and use your emotions to get what you want or get what the team wants, as opposed to, leading you astray and putting you in a worse situation.
Yeah, I agree there. And I think one thing that I believe we've talked about on the pod in the past, but that I think is worth pointing out is like the desire to suppress and eliminate emotions from the workplace is like ongoing and consistent. I think like that's something that it's always like how to be professional. Business isn't personal.
Yeah.
Like, those things aren't true. Like separating emotions from the work you're doing doesn't make you more professional necessarily. All it does is strip your humanity from the work you're doing. And especially in this era where we're talking about AI replacing jobs, whether that's valid or not right now, we're talking about like tech automation advancements in kind of how we're working with technology. I think the more we strip away our humanity in the work that we're doing, the easier it becomes for that technology to one-to-one replace what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so like, it is like
OpenAI can't cry. What's
right,
up? Can't replace me now.
Can't embarrass me in a meeting. Like, but like, okay, not to be too like dramatic about this, but I was thinking like creativity is inherently a reflection of emotion. Art is inherently a reflection of emotion. It's like either trying to elicit emotion or it's reflective of the emotion in you. Like good communication is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about how to become irreplaceable at work, there is an element of leaning into your humanity, into your emotions. I didn't realize I was going to
go off, queen.
People should be snapping or something.
I'm snapping in my head.
It's crazy. But like, I think there is something here that is worth validating. And I, as somebody who has spent a lot of time, as we've talked about, trying to be perfect, trying to increase my productivity, and then breaking my relationship with that like need to be like a perfectionist. The emotion, like allowing emotion back in or trying not to suppress it has been very challenging for me.
Yeah.
And I think also is one of the things that is like the most important of the next decade for us as like general workers.
Yeah. I mean, I think the episode's over. You just
Great.
You summed it up perfectly. I totally agree. And there is this theory, which feels very obvious now to me, but apparently this was a revolution in the 90s called Affective with an A. If, affect versus effect.
Right.
Another SAT question for the people. Affective events theory, which is basically these researchers said, wow, turns out that we're not purely logical, rational beings at work, but that things that happen at work change our affect, how we're showing up and how we're using our energy. And therefore, like positive work environments put people in a positive affect, and they do better work. Negative work environments put people in a negative effect and they do worse work. And so it is actually really smart as a leader and as a company to think about how you're designing the environments, how you're interacting with employees on an emotional level, because that actually does translate to business. And so what I think you were saying at the core of it is, if you think, oh, emotions don't matter, I don't need to be in tune with emotions, I don't need to know other people's emotions, I'm here to do business and go home, you could put a ceiling on your career. Like the best leaders are the ones who understand how to quote unquote manipulate, not in a bad way, but in a neutral way, other people's emotions to put them in a state of resonance to then do their best work. And so I think if you think emotions don't matter, you're just not going to be as effective as you could be in your career.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things. It's like what makes a really good individual contributor is an ability to like check boxes and get stuff done. And what makes a really good leader is the ability to get individual contributors to like do stuff. And I think when we've again talked about this at length in the past, but manipulation being a negative word, there's like got to be a better word for it. Maybe it's just like not, but like
it's like motivation.
Inspiration, right? What is inspiration if not manipulation?
Those little posters on the wall that have like an ant,
the cat like hanging in there.
They're
whatever.
manipulating you positively though.
Exactly.
That you can climb that
mountain. They're inspiring you, but that's like I'm saying something that is making you change how you would have acted. If it's positive, it's inspiration. If it's negative, it's manipulation.
Yeah.
But like it's still what you're doing.
100%.
And there's only emotions there. Yeah, you can appeal to your logic. You can appeal to your reasoning. But appealing to your emotion is a very, very effective way to get people to do the things that you want them to do or that are in their best interest.
Yeah. We've talked about this book. If you have not read it. I highly, highly recommend it. It's like my favorite career book outside of Range.
Oh, okay.
And that's Primal Leadership.
I actually haven't read it.
It's really good. Primal
I
Leadership by
should read it.
Daniel Goleman. And this is exactly what he's talking about. And the primal, meaning like first, means two things. First is when he talks about leadership, he talks about it being all about emotional resonance. And that it's primal because that's like the first thing that humans developed in their brain, like the limbic system, and talk about that, like emotions. But then also that it's your first job as a leader to put your team in a state of emotional resonance, to inspire and to motivate. And you can't do that if you don't master EQ and understanding how to, inspire people's emotions in a positive direction. And I think you see this all the time. Like you can have a coach that gives this halftime speech. It's very emotional, but that's exactly what you need to do to meet that moment to inspire your team, as opposed to the coach that's like, maybe have the best X's and O's, but it's not resonating. It's not hitting. It's not landing. And you use emotion to land the message that you need other people to hear to go do great work. So I just think that piece is so important for leaders, and we often forget it. It is that emotion and that resonance that you need to create.
I agree with that, but I think also something that's important to note is that emotional has like two connotations, and there's like nobody says you're too emotional at work if you're like too inspirational.
Yeah.
And you're
exactly.
like too happy, you're too fun, you're too great, like you're too fired up about the work. Like nobody's saying that when you're getting you're too emotional at work, it's the downside emotions. And I think that's also something that does have a place in the workplace. But I just have a question for you, which is, do you feel, as somebody who has stated that you're more emotional than I am, that you've felt like at any point your emotions have prevented you from doing a good job? Or have you ever gotten like feedback on the downside emotions at any point in your career?
Yeah.
Really?
I think for the most part, we talk about on the show, like identifying your spiky traits. I would say emotion is one of mine. I think for the most part, it's been a superpower, right? Putting yourself in the right environment where like being inspirational and motivational and like connecting with people emotionally, if you can channel that in the right environment, it's really powerful. Going back to Morning Brew Learning, like, getting 30 strangers on a Zoom to like feel something is really hard. I'm really good at that. And so that's a superpower. Now, if there is a negative thing that happens, and it for these, it's been like maybe interpersonal negative things that have happened at work. For me, like I get really wrapped up in that, and it's hard for me to compartmentalize that and be like, okay, I'm going to put that to the side, and now I'm back to normal, and I'm going to finish my day, and then I'll pick that up after, and I'll examine it. I'm like, yo, what's going on? Like, I need the resonance, so when there is dissonance, it's really distracting to me, and I just want to go to the heart of the problem. And in some cases, that's just like not what you need to do right then. Like everyone just needs to go home, sleep, eat a little protein bar in the morning, drink some water, come back with a fresh set of eyes the next day. That is something I struggle with. And I just don't, it's probably not going to get better because it is just a trait of mine. So I try to put myself in environments where it is a superpower, but it's definitely negatively affected me in a few cases.
I feel like for you, not to identify your problem, but for you, I feel like it's not necessarily the negative emotion, but it's like the lack of closure. The lack of like, cause I think you would be okay with somebody, for example, like not liking you. Like if it's just like somebody just like isn't your person, like that's fine. But if it's like there's an open conversation there that hasn't been like tied up.
Unresolved conflict.
I think you have problems with. I have problems with them too, but I'm much happier holding a grudge.
You can hold a grudge.
I can, and I do. And I hold them personally, I hold them professionally, and I think grudges are actually very useful. They're motivating.
You could use a grudge to drive yourself.
Perfect. Okay. So I feel like, there are these like positive emotions, emotional resonance. You're saying a lot of good terms. There's this emotional dissonance, this negative emotion that I think is probably where people are getting the critiques the most when they're talking about being emotional at work. But is going with your gut an example of being emotional? Because this is something I was kind of noodling on a little.
Interesting.
Like, is your gut, everyone has these gut instincts. Is that emotional? Like, what is that?
I feel like I've heard that the gut is tied to your brain, but I'm already on the edge of my science. I've probably lied several times in this episode, so I don't know. But yeah, that does, like, a gut reaction does feel, it's not logical. It's just something you deeply feel.
Like intuit it.
It feels very emotional. And in some cases, like, you meet someone and you're like, the vibe is off. Like, I can't put a logic to it, but it's off. And like, most of the time you end up being right, I feel like, in those situations. So I definitely think a gut decision is an emotional one. But again, I'm not using emotional in a negative way or a positive way. It's just like in a neutral framing. Yeah,
but I think why I bring it up is because, again, talking about the desire to have like logic and reasoning kind of triumph in the workplace is this desire to replace business leaders' gut feelings with data and with like, analytics and proof. And I wonder, like, the business leaders of old, who were like these great business leaders and they would just point in a direction and it was exactly right. It's like those were emotional leaders. And I just find it very interesting that we're trying to like replace some of that gut feeling, which can be wrong sometimes, with data.
Yeah.
But we haven't like made the connection necessarily as like society that we're talking about being emotional.
Yeah. And I think data is important, but I'm not sure that data is inspiring. Like, if I wanted to get someone to do something, you could use data to support your argument, and you should. I'm not saying like make shit up and just like go rah rah. But I've never looked at a dashboard and been like, dude, I'm ready to run through a wall.
Yeah.
Like, let's go.
I actually have.
Okay. Well, Kayla's a freak. Okay.
Like
Kayla's
a really good dashboard that's like beautiful. And it
now you're talking about design.
No, and it like tells a good story and you're like, hell yeah, I can't believe this is firing me up.
I agree. If the dashboard can tell the story, then sure. But that is exactly what I'm getting at, is like the numbers in a vacuum are signals to go in one direction or the other. But I don't think they're like a compelling narrative, a compelling story. And they don't, for the most part, unless you're Kayla, connect with you emotionally. Sure. So I think the job of a leader is to take data, to take anecdotes, to take insights and gut feeling and like come to their own conclusion and then use their power of emotional connection to draw people to that conclusion and make that reality happen. So I think you need a mix of everything, but I think you can't tell a compelling story without emotion.
Yeah, I of course. That's what makes a story compelling. And we'll be right back after this. Okay, back to the show.
The other thing that is interesting about emotions generally is that they are a bit contagious. Like, it is they call it an open loop system. Like, it's not, some parts of your body are like self-regulating. Like, you don't need, if your heartbeat is up, like my heartbeat is not up. Emotions are not like that. Like, if I'm really angry, that does have an effect on you.
Yeah.
And so that is the other thing. I mean, that's how this inspiration and motivation work, right? Like, you get fired up and you're able to, like, it's like almost casting a spell and getting people to the same state as you. So that's just another thing to think about, is like your emotional state will affect other people's emotional states. And so the same thing we were talking about earlier, where you're like, oh, just be purely rational and logical. Like, you sometimes you're around those people and you're like, vibe is off.
Yeah,
like,
this is my problem.
Your problem is the vibe is off.
Yeah, exactly. Vibes are always off, and like it just like fucks with my vibe.
I know. That's why I can't do this podcast anymore.
I'm like a dry sponge when it comes to emotions, and like I can be pretty like whatever. I don't know that I'm stoic necessarily, but like unless I'm like really like working myself up and getting fired up about a project or something, like I don't really like. I'm not the first mover in a situation.
Yeah.
I just had a situation yesterday where there was a little bit of hostility in a meeting.
Yeah.
And I was shocked at how quickly I responded I met hostility with hostility.
Ooh, fighting fire with fire over here.
And I was like, whoa, like that. It's been a minute since I've had like an emotionally tense conversation at work.
Interesting. Okay.
And I was surprised by how quickly I matched the energy.
Yeah. And do you think that helped the situation?
No, obviously not. Okay. Someone is hostile at me, I'm hostile back, they're going to be more hostile.
Yeah,
but
maybe.
At a point I was like, oh, I realize what's happening here. And then I was able to be like, okay, let's like pull it back a little bit. Let's talk about what the outcomes are. What are the ideal goals? Like, we're talking about something that's like personal to somebody's brand. Like, of course they're feeling very emotional about this. How do we how do we meet that and acknowledge it and also acknowledge why I'm pushing back a little bit on this? And it ended up being a really positive interaction.
Well, I actually think you showed great emotional intelligence in this example, maybe not with the original hostility, but I think what you just said, and this is I think a universal lesson for people, like you understood that it was this person's brand. Like, to me, that's just like deeply empathetic thinking. Like, you were like, I understand how I have a viewpoint, but I understand how this person might have a different viewpoint based on their circumstances. And I think that is how you connect with someone emotionally, is like, I understand where you're coming from and I'm trying to like understand that and like find something in the middle that works. So I think you did quite well.
Well, thanks. I mean, I am retelling the story, so
I'm gonna find this person, whoever they are, and they'll be like, "Dude, Kaila,
like,
no, she did not."
She was such a bitch in that meeting. Have you ever cried at work?
What a segue. I have cried at work. I think in two situations. The first was AmeriCorps. That was crying purely because it was just an emotionally taxing job. And I would say in that case, I mean, everyone that did AmeriCorps cried at least 7 times.
Sure.
Like, that's a minimum. If you didn't, you're a psycho, like straight up. So that I think was fine. And there is like research on crying at work. And my understanding of it is that like normally it's not viewed well. And like people perceive you as less competent, but unless it's for something like a death, divorce, like something personal, then people understand it. But if you're crying about the work, sometimes that's not perceived as good or bad. I would say AmeriCorps, like that was not the case there, because people are just like, we get it. Like, and it almost felt personal. And I've cried at Morning Brew when, I mean, you probably know that. You were telling me we did that earlier.
Yeah.
So maybe multiple times, but that was
we had
like
a joint cry when Morning Brew Learning got shut down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was that to me wasn't, again, about the work necessarily. It was just like that crew was so tight, and I feel like it ended in such a interesting way, and like it was like saying bye to friends in a lot of ways that.
Who, by the way, we're still close with.
Yeah, exactly.
With many of them.
Exactly. So like that's where that emotion came from. I've never like gotten feedback. Someone's like, this sucks. And I cry. Like, to me, when I get that, it's actually pretty motivating to me. I'm like, oh shit, you're right. Like, this is good. I got to like make this better. But yeah, to answer your question, yes. Yeah. What about you? I mean, I've seen some of it, so.
Okay. I have cried less and less, and I'm not
less and less.
As I've gotten
older.
older.
You got a tracker every year.
Yeah.
13 cries in 2003. I mean,
like a work related, I think again, this is very associated with like if the things that are happening at work are so closely identified, are like so close to your identity that anything bad that happens at work then becomes a an indictment on you. And so when I was, we've talked about this before, when I was interning at a bank and people were not nice generally, like I met my closest friend in that internship because we were both crying in the same bathroom.
Wow.
Like it was like more of like I don't know, it felt like
therapeutic, or
I don't know. It felt like it was like more accepted.
Okay.
It was like everyone was getting their shit rocked.
Yeah.
And everyone was sad and everyone was 21 and like we didn't have emotional regulation at all.
It's like this communal bonding almost. Yeah.
And as I've like separated myself from my work a little bit more, like bad things don't feel like they're happening to me as a person. And so I'm less likely to cry about them. I think the times where I've cried have been when it does hit my identity, when it's like, oh, I should have done better on this, or, oh, this didn't work out the way I wanted it to, or like, a hit to an ego, like, oh, I thought I was better than this. And like, clearly somebody doesn't believe that. And like, what does that say about me personally?
Interesting.
But I don't do it in front of other people. And I think, again, as somebody who is more suppressive than expressive, like at work at least, I would have a really hard time like being in a meeting with professionals, like talking about work stuff and crying.
Yeah.
I think that would be hard for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's different when maybe it's a one-on-one or, whatever. But yeah, it's been a minute since I've cried at work.
I think there's a learning in there, which is when you said like it hurts your identity. I would say like if you do see someone who is crying at work, I think our reaction is like, oh, like we critiqued their work too hard or something like that. I don't think that actually is it. When I've seen that, it's because someone feels like it affected them personally.
Right.
Like, oh, like I thought this person viewed me in this way, but turns out they don't. It is like a personal thing. And so I think it's just good advice for leaders to understand like that's the thing that you'll have to heal and amend. And it's not like give them less feedback in the future. It's just about making sure that there's that resonance and that connection emotionally with that person.
Yep.
So there's two things, and I want to talk about this too because you just mentioned suppression, called surface acting versus deep acting.
Uh-oh.
And this is the whole affective events theory coming full circle for you. So surface acting is basically when this is what you're supposed to not do with your emotions at work. You get an email from a client and it's like so annoying and you're like, you've got to be fucking kidding me.
Yeah.
Like I'm fed up with this person. But you just go, I need to be happy. So like, nope, it's all fine. And you just pretend, but it's not actually what you're feeling. That will like cause you to spiral and burn out eventually because you can't, like what you're presenting and what you're feeling can't be in discord for so long.
Right.
Deep acting is getting to that empathy I was talking about where you actually try to like get to a position where you are comfortable with that. And that comes through empathy where it's like, yes, this client's being annoying, but like I can understand maybe why. Like I'm trying to put myself in their shoes and you're actually working on like getting your emotions in line with how you feel externally. That is sustainable and that's what you should be moving for. So I think that's just other good advice is like notice when you're surface acting and like you can only do that for so long and try to work on the deep acting.
Yeah. I would also say like surface acting based on what you've just said to me can be the opposite too. Like if you're like, oh, like, God, this is kind of annoying, but like, it's not that big of a deal. But you're like, maybe your identity is with the one who's emotional or the one who's angry or the one who's annoyed by work. And you're like, it's not that big of a deal. And like, maybe you're fine deep inside, but you're like, oh, this is so annoying.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, this is how I communicate with my coworkers is by bitching, or this is how I communicate with my friends about complaining about something that's happened at work. Like, this is what I'm going to talk about. That discord also, like, I think it's different in that it doesn't cause necessarily like burnout, but it might like cause you to change your deep emotions to be more negative. You're like training yourself to be like, oh, this is the worst.
Yeah.
And so that's something I find myself doing.
Interesting.
Is I'm like, this is probably not a big deal, but my goodness, is this annoying? You know, like, and then I'm like, all right, let's like lean into that. So that's like that. Yeah. That's like the opposite of the everything's fine. Cause I think we have a tendency now to lean into more of like, no, this is horrible.
Yeah. Like this is the worst thing ever. Like lunch is not what I thought it would be.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh. And then it's like an open loop system. So people see that and then it starts to spiral.
I think we can't talk about emotions at work without talking about the gender gap, I guess, in emotions. And I think one of the things, without having any like stats to point to,
besides your entire lived experience.
My entire lived experience, anecdotally, is like, if somebody is angry, is passionate about something, how they are perceived about that emotion that's being expressed in the workplace, I believe, and I think society has shown, is different if you're a man or a woman.
Yeah.
And I think that we've seen that a lot in like CEO takedowns where like Steve Jobs was kind of a dick and like everyone
he was a dick.
Yeah. And like everyone was like, oh, he's just has such high expectations. It's not him being an asshole. It's a reality distortion field.
Yeah. they had to invent a new term.
Yeah. It's RDF. He bends reality to his will. But like a female CEO is like kind of snippy in the morning and they're like, this woman is the worst thing that's ever happened to humanity, to society, get her out.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, you know, again, I don't know exactly, like I'm sure everyone has done bad things and whatever, everyone deserves a takedown. But like, I just think it's worth noting that for some people specifically, and maybe this is something that like I've been doing subconsciously, is like, I'm suppressing emotions because I know that the way that my emotions come out will be perceived differently.
Yeah.
Because of how I present myself in the world.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and society should change, and also we'd be failing people saying that there isn't.
Just be yourself.
Yeah, just be yourself. Like you should know the game you're playing. You should know how people are going to respond, or you should find an environment where like people understand this and hopefully it's better. But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like it goes back to the whole, like, you're being too emotional. I think if we tallied up how many people have been told that
in the
and looked
history
at
of
the
work,
gender breakdown, it'd be like 97.6 to 2.4.
Whatever,
I think that adds up to
that
100.
was great.
Quick math.
Quick math.
So I totally agree, and you should definitely be aware of that as you're thinking about how you show up emotionally at work. I want to wrap up here with maybe summary / tactics / tips. So we just had an emotional conversation,
Deep
Kayla.
acting conversation.
I feel so emotionally connected to you, resonant with you here in this moment and in this space. If you had to sum it up and give someone advice, a tactic, a tip on emotions at work, what would you leave the people with?
Know thyself. I think the way that you present yourself and your emotions in the workplace is very dependent on how you interact with your own emotions. And I think if you're able to express your emotions without maybe overreacting or without feeling regret in the next, 24 hours after you sleep on it or whatever, then I think you don't need to be as protective of expressing yourself and your emotions in the workplace. And if you do have a tendency to regret what you say in the heat of the moment, maybe you have to pull back a little bit more at work.
Yeah.
And the second thing I would say is, emotional intelligence is and will always be important in the workplace. And so any attempt to suppress or ignore emotions will only hurt you in your career.
Yeah. I thought your point about the future of work and as machines get more capable on the things that can be automated, the difference is the emotion and the creativity. I thought that was a very good point. My final tactic is to work on increasing your emotional range. We talked about how great leaders use emotional resonance to inspire and motivate. And I think that emotion can take a lot of different forms. A lot of times it is positive and kind of happy and joyful. But in some cases, great leaders have to get angry.
Yeah.
Or they have to be sad. And I think the more that you can practice feeling those emotions and being comfortable with them, you have this range that increases, and it means you can be a leader in many more situations than just ones that require good job, yay.
Yeah.
And so I think just increasing your emotional range will increase your ability to be, as Daniel Goleman said, a primal leader and create resonance. So that's my tip for everyone.
I think that wraps it up nicely.
What an emotional conversation.
Should we go to our next emotional bit, our email?
Oh my goodness, I forgot about the email. Yes, per my last email, user submitted email.
Per your last email.
Per your last email, that's what it's called. Let's read the email. Hi, I love listening to your show. It feels like I'm talking with two friends. Thank you. And every episode I walk away with little nuggets of advice that are so helpful. In a recent episode, you asked what our word for 2026 is. Yes, we did. And please send us your words. My word is sparkle. I'm coming out of the baby stage with baby number 3. Congratulations. And boy, was it exhausting. I love being a mom so much, but over the past few years, it feels like I lost my sparkle a bit. I'm excited to add a little sparkle into many areas of my life. I've been steadily refreshing my wardrobe, having more fun nights out with friends, getting back into volunteer projects, refreshing areas of my house, and more. It's been fun to use sparkle as a guiding light. Asking, does this add sparkle to my life, is a great way to decide if I want to do something or not. Keep doing what you're doing. You two are amazing. Love, Abby. She didn't say love, Abby, but that felt right. Abby, I love you. That was a wonderful email.
That was very wonderful and heartwarming. And I love sparkle. I think that is we talk about the filter, make decisions using this filter, themes, use a mantra. Sparkle is perfect.
Honestly, I feel like that's what everyone needs right now, too.
Yes, we all need a little sparkle.
Times are dark. If you can find a little sparkle every day, you're doing something right.
Whether it's a sweet treat, a new outfit, or maybe a fun walk out of the way.
Exactly.
Let's add some sparkle. I love that. That made me emotional.
There
Abby.
we go. Thank you, Abby. Everyone, add some sparkle into your life. Should we roll the credits?
Let's do it.
Our producer is Michaela Heck.
Our technical director is Uchenna Oko.
Jim Orso is our audio engineer.
And our president is Devin Emery.
This show is a production of Morning Brew.
Thanks for listening, and we'll sparkle with you next week.
See y'all.